I lived years in the United States, in a place where silence became my companion, where I finally learned to find peace. But when I decided to return to Mumbai, thinking I would rediscover my home, everything changed. The noise that once was part of me began to suffocate me. The nights turned into a nightmare, and something inside me broke in a way I didn't know how to fix. Today, I feel trapped between two worlds, without truly belonging to either of them. And the worst part is that perhaps I discovered this too late. My name is Anjali Mehra. I am 62 years old, and today I live in Mumbai, or at least I try to say that with the same certainty I once had. You know when you say you live somewhere, but deep down you feel you no longer belong there? That is exactly how I feel now. I lived many years in the United States, long enough to get used to things that once seemed strange. The silence, for example. At first, that silence frightened me. I remember the first night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for some sound, a honk, someone shouting, loud music, anything that would remind me of home. But nothing came, only the sound of my own breathing. It took time, but I learned to like it. With time, that silence became peace, became rest, became a part of me. My routine there was simple. I woke up early, made my tea, sat by the window and watched the street. Hardly anyone passed. A few cars, people walking their dogs, everything very calm. I knew exactly what to expect from each day, and that did me good. After so many years of struggling, working, adapting to a different culture, I finally felt I had found a kind of balance. But then, something inside me began to change. I started to miss India, to miss the smell of food in the streets, the colors, the people talking loudly, the festivals, life happening all the time. I missed not feeling alone, because even with all that peace, there was a void I couldn't explain. My children already had their own lives. They spoke English better than Hindi. They felt at home there, but I never stopped being a visitor. And that was when I started thinking about going back. It wasn't a quick decision. I thought for months, made lists in my head, tried to imagine what it would be like. And, in my imagination, everything seemed perfect. I would return to Mumbai, rediscover my roots, my memories, and that void would disappear. At least, that was what I believed. When I finally made the decision, I felt a mix of fear and hope. I packed my things slowly, as if each object held a story. Every corner of the house reminded me of who I had become there. On the day of the trip, as the plane took off, I looked out the window and thought, I am going home. But I didn't know that word, home, no longer meant the same thing. When I arrived in Mumbai, it was like a shock. As soon as I stepped out of the airport, the sound hit me all at once. Horns, people talking loudly, cars rushing past, vendors shouting, all at the same time. It was as if the entire world was happening at that exact moment without pause. At first I smiled. I thought, this is it. This is India. This is my place. But that feeling didn't last long. In the first few days, I tried to adapt. I rearranged the house, visited some old places, talked to neighbors, tried to relive the life I had left behind. But something was different. Or perhaps, the one who was different was me. At night, when I lay down, the noise wouldn't stop. Even with the windows closed, I could hear everything. Horns, motorcycles, people talking, distant music. I would toss and turn in bed, trying to sleep, but my body no longer knew how to rest in that chaos. And it was on the third night without proper sleep that I realized something that frightened me. The silence, that silence that had once bothered me, was now what I missed most. I began to ask myself, what happened to me? How can someone miss silence in a place that has always been full of life? During the day, I tried to ignore it. But at night, everything grew stronger. I felt out of place, as if I were visiting my own life. And that was when a thought began to grow inside me. A thought I tried to avoid at all costs. What if I no longer belong here? That question gave me no peace. Because if I don't belong in India, and I never fully belonged in the United States either, then where is my place? That week, I barely left the house. I watched through the window the constant movement of the street, people coming and going, as always. But I could no longer see myself as part of it. Everything seemed too fast, too loud, too full, and I, too tired. One afternoon, I sat in the living room, held my cup of tea, and stared into nothing. And without realizing it, I began to cry. It wasn't just longing. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was a strange feeling, as if I had lost something important, but didn't know exactly what. Perhaps it was the version of myself that once existed, or perhaps I am still trying to understand who I am now, because the truth is one, and it is difficult to accept. I lived in peace for years, and now I can no longer sleep. I didn't tell anyone I wasn't able to sleep. You know how it is. We try to appear strong, especially when we make such a big decision as returning to our own country after so many years. I didn't want to hear things like, "I told you so," or "maybe you were too hasty," so I stayed quiet. But my body did not. That week, I began waking up tired every day. Even when, by some miracle, I managed to sleep a few hours, it was not real rest. It was a light sleep, broken, full of sounds entering my mind as if no door existed to hold anything back. A distant horn was enough to wake me. A dog barking, someone talking loudly in the street, a motorcycle passing, anything. And once I woke up, I couldn't fall back to sleep. I would lie there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the fan turning slowly, thinking about how something so simple, sleeping, had become a problem in my life. In the United States, I never thought about this. Sleeping was automatic, natural, part of the routine. Here, it felt like a struggle. On the 5th day, I began to feel irritable. Everything bothered me. The noise, the heat, the movement, even small things, like the sound of a pan in the kitchen, began to make me anxious. I was not like this, or at least, I didn't remember being like this. One morning, the doorbell rang. It was an old neighbor, Mrs. Patel. She had known me for many years from before I left. She walked in smiling, talking loudly, full of energy. "Anjali, you came back. Finally." I tried to smile too, offered tea, sat with her. But as she spoke, I noticed something strange. I was too tired to keep up. She told stories, laughed, commented on the neighborhood, on people. And all I could think about was the noise coming from the street. It felt like everything was happening at the same time. Her voice, the cars outside, a television on in some neighboring house. I began to feel suffocated. At one point, she noticed I was too quiet. "Are you all right?" I took a moment to answer. "I am just a little tired," she laughed. "That passes. Mumbai never changes." That phrase stayed with me after she left. Mumbai never changes. But I changed, and perhaps that was the problem. That afternoon, I tried something different. I decided to go for a walk, thinking it might help me reconnect with the city. As soon as I stepped outside, the impact came again. People rushing past, vendors calling to customers, horns non-stop, motorcycles weaving through. It was as if I had entered a very strong current, not quite knowing how to swim. I tried to walk slowly, observing everything, but within minutes, I was already tired. Not physically. It was a mental exhaustion, as if my brain were trying to process too much information all at once. I stopped at a corner, took a deep breath, and for a second, felt like running back home. And that is exactly what I did. When I closed the door behind me, I leaned against it and stood there, in silence, or at least, what silence was possible. My heart was racing. And that was when I realized something I never imagined I would feel in my own city. I was uncomfortable. That night, I tried something I hadn't done in a long time. I picked up my phone and looked for old photos from the United States. My house, my street, the window where I drank tea every morning. Everything so calm, so organized, so predictable. I stared at those photos for a long time. And, without realizing it, I began to feel nostalgia. A nostalgia that wasn't only for the place, but for who I was there. A quieter, more patient version of myself, more at peace. Here, I felt like a different person, more tense, more irritable, more lost. I set the phone down and sat on the bed, thinking, had I made a mistake? That question appeared again, stronger this time. And unlike the first time, I couldn't ignore it, because now it wasn't just a doubt. It was a real possibility. That early morning, once again unable to sleep, I went to the kitchen and made tea. I sat by the window, the same as I used to do in the United States. But it wasn't the same. Outside, the street was still alive. Even at that late hour, there was still movement, voices, sounds. I held the cup with both hands and looked outside. And for the first time since I returned, I thought about something that gave me a little fear. What if I want to leave again? But this time, where would I go? Because going back is not as simple as it seems, especially when you've already gone back once, thinking it was definitive. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a moment, and tried to find some answer inside me. But all I found was more confusion, more doubt, more noise, and a growing feeling that I was trapped between two worlds, unable to truly live in either of them. The next morning, I woke up before the sun rose, not because I wanted to, but because my body no longer knew what real rest was. I lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, feeling that heavy tiredness that doesn't go away even after hours in bed. It was as if I were always one step behind myself. I got up slowly, went to the kitchen, and made my tea. The same ritual as always, trying to bring back a little of the life I once had. I sat by the window, but this time, I didn't look outside. I looked inward, at myself, and that was when a memory came. Without warning, I saw myself in the United States on a cold morning. I was sitting in the same position, cup in hand, watching the empty street. I remember that day, I thought, this is peace. In that moment, I truly believed it. But now, here, with the noise beginning to grow outside, I started to ask myself, was that peace or was it loneliness? That question caught me off guard, because for years I had defended that life. I told myself I had found balance, that I was finally well. But was I really? Or had I simply learned to live with the silence? Because I had no other choice? I closed my eyes for a moment, and for the first time, I tried to be completely honest with myself. Yes, there was peace. But there were also days when I spoke to no one. Days when the phone didn't ring. Days when the silence wasn't comfortable. It was empty. I took a deep breath. Perhaps I had been idealizing the past too much. And perhaps I had been rejecting the present too much. But knowing this didn't resolve what I was feeling, because even understanding, I still couldn't adapt. That day, I decided to do something different. Instead of running from the city, I tried to move closer to it. I put on simple clothes, tied my hair back, and left the house with one goal: to go to the market on the corner, a place that, years ago, was part of my daily routine. When I arrived, the movement was intense. People negotiating prices, vendors drawing attention, bags being carried from one side to the other, everything very alive, very fast, very loud. For a second I thought about leaving, but this time I stayed. I took a deep breath and began walking among the stalls. I looked at the fruits, smelled the aromas, heard the voices, tried to allow myself to truly be there. A vendor recognized me. "Anjali, is it really you?" I took a moment, but smiled. "It's me." He began speaking animatedly, asking where I had been, saying that I had disappeared, that he was happy to see me. And for the first time since I returned, I felt something different. It wasn't peace, but it wasn't discomfort either. It was connection. Simple, quick, but real. I bought a few things, kept walking, and little by little, I began to feel a little more present. The noise was still there, but for a few moments, it didn't bother me as much. When I got home, I realized something important. Perhaps the problem wasn't only the noise. Perhaps it was the way I was looking at everything. I had spent so many days comparing United States and India, silence and chaos, past and present, that I had forgotten to live the now. But this didn't mean everything was resolved. That night, the challenge returned. I lay in bed, closed my eyes, and the sound started again. Horns, footsteps, voices, the same scenario as always. I turned from one side to the other, tried to ignore it, tried to focus on my breathing, but sleep wouldn't come. And that was when I felt something different this time. It wasn't just irritation. It was sadness, a quiet sadness, heavy, difficult to explain. Because deep down, I knew I could no longer go back to being who I was before. Not here, not there. I was in the middle of a transition I had created myself, and now I had to deal with it. I sat up in bed, looked at the dark room, and thought about calling my children. But I stopped. They were far away, living their lives, happy in their own way, and I didn't want to worry them. So I stayed there, alone, once more. But this time, the loneliness was different, because it didn't come from the silence, it came from the noise. I got up, went to the window and opened it a little. The sound came in even stronger. For a moment I thought about closing it again, but I didn't. I stood there, listening, feeling, trying to understand. Perhaps this is my new reality, not perfect, not quiet, but mine. And perhaps accepting this is the first step. Or perhaps I am still very far from that. I don't know. The only thing I know is that this story is not over. And deep down, I feel that something greater is yet to come. That night, I ended up sleeping. But it was not a peaceful sleep. It was that kind of sleep that comes more from exhaustion than from peace. I woke up several times, as always. But in one of those moments, something different happened. I dreamed of the United States. I was in my old house, sitting by the window, with my tea in hand. Everything was silent. A silence so deep, it seemed almost unreal. In the dream, I felt light, unhurried, noiseless, effortless. But suddenly, something began to change. I noticed that silence was becoming heavy, as if it were pressing me from inside. I looked outside and saw no one, no cars, no people, no movement, nothing. And it was then that within the dream itself, I felt fear, because that silence no longer seemed like peace. It felt like abandonment. I woke up startled. I sat up in bed, took a deep breath, and spent a few seconds trying to understand what I had just felt. The room was dark, and, as always, the noise of Mumbai was outside. But, for the first time, I wasn't immediately bothered. I stayed there in silence, just listening. And that sound, which before seemed like an attack, this time felt like life. Confusing, I know, but that is exactly what I felt. I got up, went to the window and opened it a little. A motorcycle passed. Someone spoke loudly. A dog barked in the distance, and for some reason, that didn't make me want to flee. The next morning, I woke up differently, still tired, but a little more calm. It wasn't a big change, but it was enough for me to notice something inside me was beginning to reorganize itself. I made my tea, sat by the window, and this time, I truly observed the street. A woman sweeping the sidewalk, a man arranging his small shop, 2 children running and laughing. The city was waking up, and for the first time since I returned, I felt no rejection. I felt curiosity. Later, I received an unexpected message. It was from my daughter. She lives in the United States, as you can imagine. The message was simple. "Mom, is everything all right there?" I stared at the screen for a few seconds, because the answer wasn't as simple as the question. I could say yes and close the subject, or I could be honest. And after everything I had been feeling, I decided to be honest. I replied, "I'm trying to adjust. It isn't easy." She responded quickly, "Do you want to come back?" That question caught me off guard, because until that moment, I had been avoiding thinking about it clearly. I took a long time to answer, a very long time, because whatever answer I gave, it would say a great deal about who I am now. I took a deep breath and wrote, "I don't know." And it was the truth. A few minutes later, she called me. Her voice, calm, familiar, brought me a comfort I hadn't felt in days. We talked for a while. She asked about the house, the neighborhood, how I was feeling, and, little by little, I began to open up. I told her about the noise, about the sleepless nights, about the feeling of not belonging. She was quiet for a few seconds, and then said something that stayed with me. "Mom, maybe you don't need to choose a side." I frowned, even though she couldn't see me. "What do you mean?" "Mom, you lived so long there, and now you're here. Maybe you're no longer just from one place." I didn't answer right away, but those words kept echoing inside me. After we hung up, I sat and thought. Throughout all these days, I had been trying to decide, where do I belong? United States or India? Silence or noise? Past or present? But perhaps that isn't the right question. Perhaps I am trying to fit my life into a simple choice, when, in truth, it has become more complex. I got up, went to the mirror and looked at myself, the lines on my face, the tiredness in my eyes, but also a story that no longer fits in just one place. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since I returned. I left the house, unhurriedly, without a goal, just to walk. I passed through the streets, observed people, and, little by little, began to notice something. I still know this place, perhaps not in the same way, but it is still part of me, and perhaps I am still part of it, not completely, but enough. When I returned home, I sat in the living room, and for the first time in many days, I didn't feel trapped. There were still doubts, there was still discomfort, but there was also a small space of acceptance. That night, I lay in bed, and the noise of Mumbai continued outside. But this time, I didn't fight against it. I closed my eyes and let it exist, and even taking a while, I managed to sleep. Not perfectly, but better, and in that small progress, I felt something I hadn't felt since I returned. Hope, perhaps. I can still find a way to live here, or perhaps I still have difficult decisions ahead, but for the first time, I am not so afraid of that. The next morning, I woke up with a different feeling. It wasn't happiness, but neither was it that constant weight I had been carrying since I returned. It was as if something inside me had adjusted a little, even though I still didn't know how to explain what. I lay in bed for a few minutes, listening to the sounds of the street. The horns were still there, the voices too. The movement never stopped, but for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to cover my ears. I simply listened. I got up, made my tea, and sat by the window as always. Only this time, instead of comparing to the past, I tried to stay in the present, without thinking about the United States, without thinking about how things should be, just how they are. As I observed the street, an idea began to emerge, slowly. Perhaps I don't need to transform Mumbai into a quiet place. Perhaps I need to find small pockets of silence within it. It sounds simple, but for me, that changed a great deal. Because until then, I had been fighting against the entire city, against the way it is. And that, I was never going to win. But perhaps I could create my own moments, in my own way. That same day, I decided to test this. I closed the windows a little, arranged the house in a more comfortable way, put on some soft music, something I used to listen to in the United States, and I sat on the sofa. For a few minutes, it worked. The noise was still outside, but inside my home, I managed to create a calmer space. Not perfect, but enough, and that gave me a small sense of control again. Later, I went out to buy a few things, but this time, I went with a different attitude. Not as someone being invaded by chaos, but as someone simply passing through it. It is different. And little by little, I began to notice details I had ignored before. The smile of a vendor, a child holding their mother's hand, the smell of food being prepared, life happening, intensely, yes, but also full of meaning. I still felt tired more quickly than before, still bothered by some sounds, but it was no longer that desperation. It was adaptation. When I returned home, I sat and thought about everything that had happened in the past few days. And for the first time, I was able to see something with more clarity. I did not make a wrong choice. I made a difficult one, and there is a difference. Because a wrong choice brings regret. A difficult choice brings transformation. And perhaps that is exactly what I am living through now. That afternoon, I decided to do something I had been avoiding since I arrived. I picked up my phone and opened the flight options to the United States. I stared at the screen for a few minutes. Dates, times, prices, all there, a click away. I could go back. It would be easy, at least in the practical sense. But this time, I felt no impulse. I didn't feel that desperate urge to flee. Instead, I thought calmly, if I go back now, will I be going back by choice or by fear? That question made me stop, because I didn't want to flee. I had already fled once, without even realizing it. Fled from the silence, by returning to the noise, and now, I didn't want to do the reverse journey for the same reason. I closed the phone, not as someone giving up on going back, but as someone who has not yet finished understanding where they stand. That night, I did something different. Before sleeping, instead of worrying about the noise, I wrote. I picked up an old notebook and began putting everything on paper. What I felt, what I thought, what I was afraid to admit. And, as I wrote, I realized something important. I was beginning to truly listen to myself. without distractions, without comparisons, just me. When I finished, I closed the notebook, lay down, and took a deep breath. The noise was still there, but this time, it didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like part of the scenery. I closed my eyes. It took a while, but I slept, and in the middle of the night, I woke up only once. I looked around, heard the sounds, and went back to sleep, without fighting, without overthinking. The next morning, when I woke up, I noticed something simple, but very important. I had rested, truly, not completely, but enough. And that, after so many days, felt like an enormous victory, perhaps small for other people, but for me, it was everything, because it showed that, little by little, I am finding a way, not perfect, not the same as before, but possible. And perhaps that is the beginning of something greater, or perhaps it is only the first step of a decision yet to come. That morning, as I finished my tea by the window, I felt something I hadn't felt since I returned to Mumbai. Calm. It wasn't that perfect calm I had in the United States, but it was a possible calm, real, present, and for the first time, I wasn't thinking about fleeing. I stayed there for a while, observing the street as I had done on all the other days. The difference is that now, I was not comparing. I was not trying to transform that moment into something it wasn't. I was just living. A woman rushed past, talking on the phone. A vendor set up his stall. 2 children argued and then began to laugh. Life, happening, and somehow, I felt part of it, not completely, but enough. After so many days of confusion, sleepless nights, doubts, I finally understood something that had been right in front of me all along. I did not lose my place. I simply changed, and that changes everything. I spent years trying to fit in the United States, learning to live in silence, to be more reserved, to find comfort in routine. And, without realizing it, that also became part of me. But it did not erase who I was before. The woman who grew up in Mumbai, who lived amid noise, people, intensity. These 2 versions do not compete, they coexist. And perhaps my mistake was trying to choose only one. That afternoon, I decided to do something symbolic. I went to a market a little further away, a place I used to visit many years ago. I walked slowly, observing everything more carefully. The sounds were still there, loud, constant, but now, they didn't overwhelm me. I could move through them, without getting lost. I bought a few things, chatted with a vendor, smiled without effort. Small gestures, but which for me meant a great deal. When I returned home, I sat in the living room and picked up my notebook. I opened to a blank page and wrote a question. What do I want now? I stared at those words for a while, and unlike other days, the answer came with more clarity. I don't want to flee. I also don't want to prove anything to anyone. I want to build a life that makes sense for who I am today, here or anywhere, but with awareness, with choice, with truth. I closed the notebook, and, for the first time since I returned, I felt I had some control over what comes next. Later, I picked up the phone again. I opened flights to the United States. I looked calmly, without anxiety, without rush. And then, I did something that, days ago, I would not have been able to do. I didn't buy the ticket, but I also didn't close the possibility, because now I understand. Going back doesn't have to be flight. Staying doesn't have to be obligation. I can choose, and just knowing this, something inside me settled. That night, I prepared for sleep as usual. I lay in bed, and the noise of Mumbai continued outside. Horns, voices, movement. The city never stops. But this time, I smiled, because I noticed something simple, but which changed everything. The noise didn't disappear, but the way I hear it changed. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and let everything exist, without resistance. And for the first time since I returned, I slept deeply, without interruption, without struggle, without fear. The next morning, I woke up with the light coming through the window. I sat up in bed, breathed deeply, and felt something I didn't know was still possible to feel there. Belonging. Not perfect, not absolute, but enough. I got up, went to the window, and looked outside. Mumbai was the same as ever, but I was not. And perhaps That is what truly matters, because in the end, it is not about choosing between silence or noise, between one country or another. It is about learning to live with everything we have become along the way, and accepting that, sometimes, peace is not in the place, it is within us.